Next, we continue to work on the Bison hairstyling with 3D hairbrush. Before starting, it is helpful to layer the hair first, making the styling adjustments more convenient and faster. Generally, the hair can be divided into 3 parts: the top of the head, cheeks, and neck. We'll start with the cheek hair. First, handle the weight of the cheek hair. You can copy the existing weight and modify the weight in other areas based on that. To easily identify the weight area, you can enable hair display, which helps in identifying the weight areas. After determining the weight area, you can use the blur brush to soften the edges, making the transition between hairs more natural. Next, modify the weight of the neck hair. Then the weight of the top hair. To better integrate the hair on the top of the head with the cheek and neck hair, first mark the weight area of the cheeks and neck, then proceed with the top weight painting. Once the weight painting is complete, you can start adjusting the hairstyling. Begin with the cheek. Start adjusting the hairstyling around the eyes. For easier control of the eye hair, first paint the weight of the eye area. Name the clump modifiers to differentiate each modifier's function. Then assign the painted weight to the clump's effective area. Adjust the number of clumps. If the current number of clumps is too low, causing the hairstyling to be insufficiently detailed, you can increase subdivision to add more clumps. After that, we find the effect of the clumps too regular, which is not what we desire. This can be solved by modifying the clump type. There are 2 types for the clump: parent and generated. Choose one based on the specific situation. Parent subdivides clumps based on guides, allowing control over the number of clumps via number of guides, whereas generated is entirely controlled by parameters. Compared to generated, parent is more convenient for precise control. There are 2 algorithms for parent: fan and random. Random generates clumps more randomly. If you want to create a random clump effect, random is more suitable because the fan is more uniform and regular. Let's observe it. If the number of clumps still seems too low due to parent, you can manually add more guides with the add brush. You may notice that the guides around the eyes are too long. For a better transition with the model, you may shorten the guide length. The clumps around the eyes are too uniform, they need to vary in strength. You can use the blur brush to smooth the edges of weight, making the clumps near the eyes weaker, creating strength changes for the clumps. Let's observe the hair. If the hair appears too dense, you can appropriately reduce the number of hairs. Next, you can add a noise modifier to further refine the hair styling around the eyes. Assign the eye weight to the noise modifier and rename it. Pay attention to the order of modifiers. Modifiers are calculated from top to bottom, meaning the first modifier is calculated first, then based on the first modifier, the second is calculated, and so on. If the order of the clump and noise modifiers is reversed, it may affect the final result. Therefore, when adjusting the position of modifiers, arrange them based on the expected results. Continue adjusting the parameters for noise modifier. If the noise effect is too strong, you can appropriately reduce the intensity. Enable threshold for random hair effects, as real hair often exhibits variations in strength. Observe the hair length, especially the hair around the eye sockets, which may be too long. Modify the guides to adjust the uneven parts. After that, check the effects, and you may find that the randomness and clump effects around the eye sockets can be further improved. So let's continue adjusting the weights. When modifying the weights, you can enable the hair display to view the weight area and ensure the painted weights are accurate. Enter particle edit mode to further modify the hair direction. Then you can render to check the final effect. Rendering results show that the number of clumps still appears insufficient, making the hair look coarse. You can increase the number of clumps to make the hair more detailed. After rendering, if the hair length appears too even and lacks random variations, you can achieve random length variations using the length modifier. Cut trims the hair, and enabling randomization will achieve random lengths. Here, let's talk about the function of randomization, which randomize parameters and value. Random range controls the randomness range. Threshold controls the percentage of hair without random effects. Clump, curl, and random effects can all support randomization. After that, let's render to check the effects. The clumps lack variation and the clump size is too even. You can adjust the size of the clumps to add details. Before that, you can first adjust the hair direction. You can first name the relevant vertex groups and assign them to the newly added length modifier, ensuring they only affect the hair in the eye area. Add another clump modifier to achieve size variations in clumps. This clump modifier is used to create large clumps, so you need to adjust its position to place it at the very top. Adjust the clump modifier's clumping strength. To make the effect more pronounced, you can first turn off random. When parameters are reduced, small clumps will appear within large clumps, adding details and achieving size variations in the clumps within the eye area. Now you can render and check the hair. Make fine adjustments to the large clumps. It's not necessary to apply this effect everywhere, which may generate overly uniform clumps. Paint weights for the large clumps influenced area, affecting the area below the eye sockets. After painting, assign it to the large clump modifier. This makes the clump variations richer. Next, you can render to check the effects. The rendered effects show that hair length variations are insufficient. You can further enhance that. The current length variation is appropriate, but the rendered effects show that the hair direction around the eye sockets is still too straight, lacking variation. You can adjust the direction through curl in the clump modifier, making it more random. Enable curl and adjust the frequency. The default frequency is quite uniform. You can break it by randomizing the frequency to achieve random effects. After enabling random, the curling effects become more random and details increase. Based on the effects, adjust the frequency and amplitude. After that, preview the effects. The hair below the eye sockets is too short, causing the curling effects to be too strong. You can appropriately increase the guide length, then modify the parameters based on the effects. After that, render again to check the effects. Currently, the effects are suitable, but the render shows that the hair around the eye sockets transitions unnaturally with the model. The main reason is that the hair around the eye sockets is too long and thick. To improve the transition, you can further shorten the guide length. Additionally, you can use functions in the add-on to control the thickness variations in the hair. To use this function, you have to switch Render Engine to Cycles Hair for the effects to display properly. Add weight and paint the area for hair thickness variations. You can first name the vertex groups. When the weight is 1, the hair thickness remains unchanged. When the weight is below 1, the hair becomes thinner, thus achieving hair thickness variations and improving the transition with the model. After painting, set the weight and enter Preview mode to check the hair thickness. You can also check through rendering. The render shows that the hair transitions more naturally with the model. The hairstyling around the eye sockets is basically complete. Next, let's start adjusting the cheek hair styling. To create the cheek hair styling, first, you need to create the clumps, starting with adding a clump modifier. The current clump modifier affects the overall hair effects, therefore, you need to first add a weight to control the area of the clumping effects. To paint the weight accurately, you can first mark out the weight of the eye socket area, then further modify it based on the marked area. The basic weight should not affect the hair growth area, therefore you can copy a vertex group and modify it based on that. After handling the weight, assign the vertex group to the clump modifier. Also, name the newly added clump modifier for easier management. In the clump modifier, first modify the number of clumps. If the current number of clumps is too low, you can increase subdivision. Also, to make the clump generation more random, you can change the algorithm to random. After that, the number of clumps is already suitable. Since the hair of North American bison is typically random and curly, you need to enable curl to add variations to the hair styling. First, set some basic parameters and observe the initial effects. Currently, the curling at the tips of the hair is somewhat weak. You can enable curve control for curl so that the curling strength at the hair tips can more closely match the strength at the roots, thus making the curling effects more uniform. If the curling effects are not ideal, you can adjust frequency. Setting positive and negative values will result in different curling effects. Choose the appropriate value based on the hair direction to avoid conflicts between the direction and curling. When initially adjusting the curling effects, there's no need to be overly precise, as later modifiers might affect the early adjustments. You can make final refinements after all modifiers have been added. The current clumping intensity is quite uniform. You can achieve intensity variations through the randomization of factor and clump. Clump affects the intensity variation of individual clumps, while factor controls the intensity variation of each clump. Here you can quickly achieve random intensity through the randomization of factor currently. After that, let's adjust the randomization. First, assign the hair weight, then reduce the random intensity a bit. The default random effect won't affect the hair roots, allowing a better transition with the model. However, since North American bison hair is quite random, you need to enable curve control to make the random effects more obvious. Also, reduce the frequency to enhance the random effects. On the basis of the random effects, you can add length randomization to make the hair edges more naturally random. Then assign the vertex group to the modifier and rename it. After the initial adjustments, you can render to check the hair. Observe the render. The intensity of the cheek hair clump seems too strong. You can appropriately weaken the intensity. Although the hair already exhibits clumping effects, it lacks size variations. You can refer to the clumping effects of the eye socket hair and add a new clump modifier. Before that, you can assign the newly added modifier with corresponding vertex groups. Add a new clump modifier and assign hair weight to it. When creating large clumps, choosing generated type can quickly reduce the number of clumps. During adjustment, pay attention to the position of the modifier. After adjusting the modifier position, you can weaken the intensity of the large clumps. Merely reducing the clump intensity is not random enough. Through the randomization of factor, you can achieve more random large clumps, or you can try different random seeds to select the appropriate effect. After adjustments, you can render to check the effects and adjust it based on the results. During the process of production, you also need to frequently render to check the effects. You can also frequently turn modifiers on and off to compare the effects. After the overall effects are roughly complete, you need to create intensity variations in the large clumps. Use weight to control the area of large clumps, only retaining the rear cheek area. After assigning the weight, render again to check the effects. You can find that the cheek hair clumps lack large-scale intensity variations, and the current clumps are too loose. To increase randomness, you can add sharp clump effects. Before creating sharp clumps, you can first modify the direction of this part to facilitate subsequent styling adjustments. After modifying the direction, paint the weight area. After that, add another clump modifier and place it above the length modifier to keep the effects correct. After adding the modifier, adjust the sharpness of the clumps. You can use curve control to shape the clumps and enable curling effects to enhance details. Sharp clumps are affected by other modifiers. You need to block these interferences to focus on adjusting the sharp clumps. Delete excess weight areas. While adjusting the sharp clumps, you need to modify the hair direction and modifier parameters together to quickly achieve the desired effects. The transition of sharp clumps with the surrounding hair is not natural enough. You can enable threshold to better blend sharp clumps with surrounding hair. Further adjust the details based on the rendering results, especially the curling amplitude and frequency. You can turn modifiers on and off to check the hair curling. You can find that the hair styling in this part is still not rich enough. To add layers to the hair, you can add a new layer of clumps, making the overall styling richer. The new clumps need to be relatively sharp to distinguish from other layers. By enabling threshold, you can enhance randomness. After that, render again and fix any issues found. The direction of the cheek hair still appears too straight. You can make it more random. During the process, you can switch to object mode frequently to check the effect. And you can find that the hair at the rear of the cheeks lacks small, sharp clumps. You can add a clump modifier in the same way. To make the sharp effects more pronounced, you can adjust the curling parameters, avoiding ruining the hair direction. After adjusting the small, sharp clumps, continue refining the styling of the front cheek, increasing randomness. You can first modify the hair direction, then create the hair styling. Here, to better organize the direction, you can select only the necessary guides. Now is the post-refinement. Increase the hair segments to add more detail to the direction. Use the noise brush to quickly create random direction. Use the noise brush together with the 2D brush for refinement. For areas difficult to handle, you can use the comb brush. The front cheek styling needs individual control. You can remove the effects of other modifiers on the front cheek. Check each modifier one by one to determine if modifiers need to be modified. Then, modify the weight. After that, you need to check the effects of the modifiers. The hair direction of the front cheeks lacks random variations. You can continue to refine it. For some detailed hair directions, the 2D brush is suitable for grooming. Handle the hair transition between cheek and eye socket to make it more natural. After grooming the direction, you can start adjusting the specific styling of the front cheek hair. First, paint the weight area. Next, you can adjust the styling, starting with the clumps. The clump effects of the front cheek hair styling are not strong enough. You can appropriately weaken the overall clumping, but avoid being too uniform. For this, you can adjust factor to enhance randomization. To enhance the variation in hair direction, you can enable curl to make the hair styling richer and more natural. After adjusting the clumps, you can add a noise modifier to further increase the hair randomness. You can first name the modifier, then proceed with adjustments. After that, add a length modifier to create random variations in hair length. When adjusting length randomness, you can modify the hair direction to add details. Compared with the hair behind the cheek, you can add a layer of small clumps to the front cheek hair, making it more detailed. To achieve more random, small clumps, you can adjust the parameters for generating method to make the new clump's position different from before. Next, you can create the mouth hair styling. First, paint the weight for the mouth area. Then, adjust the mouth hair clumps. The current number of mouth clumps is too low. You can increase the number through subdivision and enable randomization for clumping intensity to enhance the variation. Add a noise modifier to add randomization to the mouth hair. As per your need, weaken the randomization intensity in the mouth area. The randomization of mouth hair requires strength variations. For example, hair near the nose has weaker randomness, while hair near the cheeks has stronger randomness. This strength variation can be achieved through expressions without needing weight painting. After that, add a length modifier to create random lengths. The overall effects of mouth hair are quite good, but to enhance details, you can use a length modifier to generate a layer of randomly long guides, adding realism. Add a length modifier, slightly increase the length, and control the quantity of random guides through thresholds. If you find that the guide length near the cheeks is too long, you can control that through weight. Next, to better blend the mouth hair with the nose model, you can adjust hair thickness variations to optimize the transition. Through rendering, you can find that the transition area is somewhat insufficient. You need to expand it somewhat. Thus, the hairstyling in the mouth area is complete. Next, you can create the hair styling under the head. Copy the basic model of the lower hair from the cheek hair. Press F9 and isolate the hair system to avoid subsequent adjustments affecting the cheek hair. Assign the weight area for the hair. Then delete all modifiers from the current hair to remake them. If the current number of guides is too large, you can reduce it appropriately. The lower hair styling also starts with the clump modifier, adjusting the clumping effects to match the hair reference. The feature for the hair in this area is curling, so you need to prioritize creating the curling effects. Observe, and you may find that the weight area is somewhat excessive. Adjust the weight area, removing the weight from the chin area. Next, continue refining the hairstyling. Due to a high curling frequency, you need to further increase randomization intensity to avoid overly regular hair. After adjustments, you can render to check the effects. Now the curling for rear hair is too strong. You can copy the current modifier, control the clumps and curling separately, and use expressions to adjust the curling strength variation. You can turn it on and off to view and compare the effects. After that, add a noise modifier to create random hair effects. Use threshold to enhance hair randomness, making the hair more natural. The curling frequency is still somewhat weak, you can increase it a bit more. Add a length modifier to create random variations in hair length. Through rendering, you can find that the current randomness lacks variations in the overall direction. You need to adjust the randomness strength, using expressions to achieve strength variations. And adjust it based on the effects. By adding an extra length modifier, you can further refine the random length of the edge hair, making it more realistic. Enter wireframe mode to better observe and adjust the edge hair's random length. Through threshold, manage the quantity of guides of random length. Check the rendering effects to confirm that the edge hair is natural and realistic. If the underlying hair appears too sparse, you can weaken the first length modifier, increasing the underlying hair. After adjustments, observe the overall contour. If the hair appears too fluffy or the direction too straight, you need to create curvature variations. For ease of operation, you can select the area of guides that needs adjustments. Increase the number of segments for more detailed grooming of curvature variations, avoiding overly straight hair. After grooming the direction, render to check the overall effects, confirming whether the final adjustments match the hair reference. After rendering, you can find that the hair direction is still somewhat straight. You can further groom the guides, making them more curved. Then, enter object mode to check the hair. You can enable the cheek hair to view the overall effects. The current effects are alright. Next, create the hair styling for the top head. You can copy and create the top hair based on the hair under the head. First, assign a vertex group to the top hair. Then increase the number of guides. Delete the previous modifiers, then start creating the top hair styling with clump styling. Enable curl to create random curling effects. After that, you can rotate the view to check the hair. Currently, the clumps are somewhat uniform, lacking large clumps. You can add a clump modifier to increase the random variation in clumps. Next, continue creating random hair effects. After that, add length modifiers to create random hair lengths. Through observation, you can find that the hair's random effects are somewhat too strong. You need to weaken the randomness. Render to check the effects. The top head lacks some curled hair. You need to create these curling effects. Add a clump modifier and enable curl, increasing the frequency and random variations. Enable threshold to create a layer of small curled hair to the top head, adding details. After that, render to check the effects. At this point, the curling frequency is still high. Further adjustments are needed. Then the small curled hair is improved, but a layer of sparse random hair is still missing, which can add more details to the top head. This layer of random hair has a high frequency. You can enable threshold to adjust the randomness effects. Due to the high random frequency, you need to increase the hair steps to achieve more realistic effects. When adjusting threshold, you need to be aware that if two modifiers have the same threshold and random seed, they might affect the same area. Therefore, ensure their parameters differ to achieve randomness for hair effects. After that, render to check the effects. You can see that the top hair looks good, but the short hair on the sides of the top head and the hair at the very front does not. You need to adjust it. First, paint the hair weight. Then assign the vertex group to the corresponding hair modifier. Next, rotate the view to check the effects. Add a clump modifier, create hair clumps and curling effects. The top hair direction is quite straight. You need to groom for some curvature. You can use the noise brush to quickly create random hair directions. After that, the top head hair effects will be more random. Then adjust the hairstyling on the sides of the top head. Look, in this process, be aware that the hair randomness is weak. You need to differentiate it from the top hairstyling. Then rotate the view to check the effects. To ensure a better transition between the top hair and side hair, you need to make the weight painting smoother. Take a look at the hair effects. The top hair looks alright. After that, enable all the hair to check the overall effects. You can find that the small curled hair on the top head is not obvious. Check and adjust some parameters. And you can find that the modifiers for the side hair don't have the vertex groups assigned. You need to assign the corresponding vertex groups. The edges of the top hair are too straight, lacking some length variation. You can further modify it. The straight hair on the top needs grooming to make it more random. After that, enable all the hair and render to check the final effects. Now the effects are essentially complete. Thus, the North American Bison hair creation course is finished.